wardrobe with a bread knife he took from my kitchen, and they also found some rope and some duct tape. The police told me that there had been many reports on this guy telling young teens that he's a friend of the family, and then he would try and kidnap them for ransom. He had been wanted for a while for similar crimes, and I'm not sure what came of him, but the police also told me that I was very lucky and that I did the right thing. They called my mum and dad, and they were on their way back as soon as they heard. After this incident, I now keep my pocket knife next to my bed when I sleep.
Number 3.
I lost my wife 2 years ago, and my son's twin. It happened in a car accident in which a drunk driver ran them off the road and they hit a tree while returning home from the store. My son was 6 at the time, and I lived in a big house on 4 acres because my wife and I planned on having a big family. The layout of the house is as follows. My room entrance was next to my son's room entrance, and all you needed to do is make a quick left after you exit my son's room and you would be in my room. Next to my room is another bedroom we use as a playroom for my son and his friends. Across from that room is the kitchen, and then straight down from my son's room is the living room and the front door. Beside our house, there's a cottage that my little sister rented for me that was down the driveway of my own property. Across the street lived an elderly couple whose house faced the cottage, and you could see in the front room of the cottage from there. Jake, my older neighbour, he was a retired drug cop for the county, and he was responsible for German Shepherd breeding, and he had dogs that were a part of a K9 unit around the county. They had 2 pups left out of the one litter, and when my wife and son were alive, they gave each of my boys a female puppy to raise as their own. The boys would go over to the old couple's house when I fixed the easy jobs for them, and they'd invited us over to dinner for helping them out. Sometimes my sons would sleep over at Jake's house when I or my wife couldn't be home to watch them. My sons would sleep over at the old couple's house because they acted like grandparents to them. Lucky my son could bring his dogs over too. Anyway, my sister got married to a guy who had 3 teenage sons and a daughter 6 months after my wife and son died. Since the cottage only had 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom and 1 kitchen and a family room, my sister asked me if they could rent out the big house. No one in my family was happy that my sister married her boyfriend. The guy was creepy, and one of his sons, Kyle, would harass my boy every time the family got together. When Kyle got near my boy, both dogs, Ash and Tara, would go crazy and growl when Kyle or anyone from his family came near. Ash and Tara didn't like my sister either, and it was a bit strange. One day, my son was playing out with his friends, and Kyle stated that he would kill Ash and Tara. I just turned the corner and told Kyle,
"If you hurt my son or his dogs, I'll make sure you will not have your next birthday."
Kyle had the holy shit look on his face. Kyle ran and told my sister what I just told him. My sister called me and started yelling at me. I just told her basically if my son or dogs get hurt or die, she'll be taking it to the sheriff. Kyle was a troublemaker in our town, and if something was stolen or broken in, the sheriff would visit him as the prime suspect. The sheriff knew where Kyle lived, and the sheriff was actually my best friend growing up. One day, my son was playing outside the cottage while I was doing yard work. Kyle pulled up in his car and started yelling at my son that he was going to beat him up and going to slit his throat. Every time Kyle did this to my son, he would cry and yell for me. One night at Jake's house, the older gentleman, I was telling him and his wife just to be careful because Kyle was unstable and so was the rest of the family. A few months later, someone broke into their house and they met Jake's German Shepherd, who didn't like anyone but the couple and my son. Before Jake's 2 dogs could get a bite of the intruder ran out of the house and shut the door. Unknown to the intruder, Jake had a silent alarm system that went off. And, well, naturally, the sheriff came across to the road to ask Kyle some questions, like where he was and so forth. Well, the police didn't catch the intruder, but my neighbours and I knew it was Kyle. After that incident, Jake told me of a buddy of his who worked on training canine dogs for the police and the feds. Jake's friend could teach both of my boys German Shepherds to protect him, and to train both dogs to be therapy dogs so they both would be around my boy all the time. I told him I was interested, and told Jake, no matter what the cost, I'd do it. So, I explained to my little boy that Tara and Ash would be going to doggy school over the summer, and he would go with them so the dog trainer could train them to protect him and myself. So when school let out for the summer, my son, Ash and Tara went to the training on the weekends, and I would go too. I would take my dogs, my son, Jake and his wife, my neighbours, so I could go to work. Then pick them all up after a day. Kyle surprisingly stopped by one day during the summer and asked me where my boy went during the day. I told him to piss off and get a life and get out of my sight and leave my son the fuck alone. This angered Kyle, and he told me that he would make sure I would pay for disrespecting him. He had that killer look in his eyes. I called my friend, the sheriff, and reported to him what Kyle told me. The sheriff came and talked to Kyle, and I came over to the cottage after. The sheriff told me that there was nothing he could do at the moment, but that I should think about arming myself. I told my friend I already carried a gun, and there's a gun in the house. After the sheriff left, my sister's husband came down and started to pound at my door, yelling and cussing at me for calling the cops on his son. I just told him to stay away from my home and my son. I also warned him that I had no problem protecting my son. This seemed to infuriate him even more, but he left when he saw Jake's son standing on Jake's porch just staring at us. Jake's son was also in the law enforcement, and I knew him because he thanked me for helping out his parents all the time. Jake's son also told me that his father kept him up on all of the drama that was happening at my house. My sister called me a few hours after the incident and told me that she decided to take her family and husband off for a vacation for a week or so to allow everyone to cool down. This truly was a blessing, and there was some peace and quiet for a few weeks. After a long summer of going to work and training with the dogs, my sister and her family came home. When I saw Kyle, he had this sinister look on his face, and I got a bad feeling, and was actually a bit scared. My son was a new person after the confidence with training the dogs and hanging out with Jake and his wife. It was the Saturday after Halloween that I had the scare of my life. I took my son and his bag full of candy to his room and laid him onto his bed to go to sleep for the night. Both dogs slept in the same room with my son near the entrance of the room. My son slept far away from the window that faces the main road and Jake's house. After putting my son to bed, I went to the kitchen to grab some soda and chips. I then went to the living room where the TV was. I was watching the news at around 10 PM and I must have dozed off. I was then suddenly awoken by glass being broken and my son's two dogs going absolutely crazy. The dogs were barking and some guy was yelling to get them off of him. I grabbed the shotgun I had in a safe in the closet in the hallway. By the time I found the dogs, they were barking and biting someone in my bedroom in the dark. When the person stood up, I shot them with my shotgun twice and the dogs ran out of the room. My first instinct was to look to see if my son was safe. I went to his room and he was in the closet crying, with the two dogs sitting out in front of the closet barking. I heard the front door open and I turned around and pointed my gun, and I saw that it was Jake and he had his shotgun. I told Jake to take my son over to his house and I would go over into the playroom to see if there was anyone in it. Jake took my son and the dogs followed. I heard police sirens in the distance now. I was later told that Jake's wife is the one who called the cops after hearing the shotgun shots at my house. The police pulled up and they came barreling through my front door with their guns drawn. I was told to put my gun on the floor and walk backwards with my hands in the air. I was detained in the police car until the sheriff came up to me, opened the door, and he told me that it was Kyle laying on the floor with a kitchen knife in his hand, and he looked dead. When my sister's husband heard this, he went crazy, and he began threatening to kill me and to do the same thing that I had done to his son. Well, the cops arrested him for threatening to kill me as well. I was taken down to the sheriff's department and questioned. After the sheriff and district attorney looked over the case, they did not file murder charges on me because of the threat Kyle made to my son, and Kyle broke into my home with the intent to kill me and my son. My sister, she was furious, and the day that she was told that no charges were going to be filed against me, she took her family up and left everything at my home she was renting. Unfortunately, she divorced her husband and then killed herself. I haven't heard from the husband, but from what the sheriff told me, he's serving a life sentence for killing his third wife. I still live in the same house with my son, and I still go visit Jake and his wife daily to make sure they're okay. I also thank them for being such good neighbours to me and my son.
Number 2.
This happened a few years ago. It was the 4th of July weekend, and my parents were actually going away. They had pets, so they asked me if I could stay at the house and watch them and feed them. I didn't mind and brought along my PlayStation to keep me busy. Now, they have a garage and it's detached from the house. There's one car in it and my father's tools. He has everything. This man could sell Craftsman half the company back if he wanted to. Anyway, it was the first night they were gone, and I was drinking proceed out the back door, through the little back porch and to the recycling bins. As I'm doing this, I notice the side door to the garage is cracked open. Thinking mainly that my father had possibly left the garage door open, I go to close it. I'm walking towards the door, and it suddenly just shuts on me. I stand there frozen in fear and try to start thinking rational thoughts. Now, there's a window on the side of the garage about 3 feet from the door. I go to the window and cup my hands, trying to see if there's anything in there. I'm standing there for about a good minute looking into the darkness. I keep thinking I can see little bits of movement, but I wasn't sure if it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. I'm just about to say it was the wind when suddenly this hideous white face turns and looks at me. That whole time, I hadn't been looking into the darkness. I was actually looking at the black hair on the side of someone's head. Someone who was watching the door. Here I am, eye to eye with this face for what seems like forever. I'm almost paralyzed. I fall back and then scramble to my feet. I run up the little stairs through the screened-in porch and into the house. I lock the door behind me and I turn the light off in the kitchen and look through the window. I see the light in the garage going on and off through all the windows. I start running through the house, turning every light I come across off. If there was somebody out there, I didn't want them to know where in the house I was. I begin making my way to the front room when I hear a loud bang from the back door. Suddenly, I hear glass breaking, and what I can only describe as what sounded like a high-pitched dog whining. Almost shitting bricks, I turn and run towards the dining room where my phone had been charging. Doing so, I was in direct sight of the back door. I grabbed my phone and turned, and I'll never forget this image. As I turned, I saw the same face I saw in the window, only connected to a head that was smashed through the window of the door. Blood was pooling on the floor, and it was dripping down the door. His head and his arm were in the house. He was moving and flailing frantically. I saw one hand up against the top part of the door holding the frame. I also noticed it was partially gripping a hatchet. I nearly passed out from fear. At this point, I yelled something. I don't remember what was said, but it was enough that the person noticed me in the darkness and started pulling himself through the broken glass. I got my legs working again and ran to the front room and started pulling the door open. This is when I started hearing that loud shrieking again. I managed to lock the bottom lock on the handle as I got myself outside. Once I got out, I dialed 911 and screamed for the police. I hid around the corner of my car in the driveway and listened. All I could hear was whining and screaming while the insane person just smashed things in the house. About 5 minutes after I called, the police showed up. Right when they saw me, they came over and asked what was going on. I told them, and they looked to the house and called for backup. Right as we all looked, we noticed the man at the front door. He was standing in the glass door with the main inside door open. He was wearing a white shirt with what looked like bicycle shorts and no shoes on. He was still holding the hatchet and he was bleeding everywhere. The cops pulled their guns out, but the man closed the door and went back into the house. At this point, the cops noped the fuck out of there and decided that calling a SWAT team was a better idea. They raided the place, and when they did, they found the man naked, hiding under my parents' bed. He had smashed pretty much everything in the house, and there legitimately was blood on everything. He had cut his arm and stomach wide open with the glass in the back door. He took an ambulance ride to the hospital, of course, after he was tased. Apparently, he was a mentally unstable individual, and he was living in the garage the whole time. I don't know how long he'd been in there for, or even how he got in there, but it was my father's hatchet he was using. It was found buried in the wall of the living room.
Number 1.
This just happened a few weeks ago. I work for a security company as a patrol officer in Oregon. It's a kind of semi-police operation. We patrol client properties and respond to alarms as well as non-emergency calls. While on a routine patrol at about 4 in the morning, I received an alarm call about 16 miles from my location, out in a very rural area. It was just a garage door hit, no motion sensors or other alarms, which is usually an indication of a false alarm or an animal hitting the door or something. I'd just been called out to that location a few days prior to the same thing and knew that no one was currently living there. So I notified the other officer on duty and headed out to what I expected would be an uneventful call. Now, for those of you who don't know, winter in my part of Oregon is very foggy and wet. At 4 o'clock in the morning, there's a heavy overcast allowing no moonlight in. You can't even see the city lamps from the interstate off-ramp at this time. I cruised onto the interstate, going a whopping 55 miles per hour through the thick blinding fog, and arrived to the exit I needed to take after a few minutes. I carefully drove through the back roads to the long, pothole-filled gravel road that was the private drive to the residence where the alarm was located. I slowly crept up the steep drive, slipping in and out of the water-filled holes, which were unavoidable, having less than 10 feet of vision through the thick fog. Large evergreen trees and tall thick grass lined the narrow single-car road. There was no way for me to safely turn around until I reached an actual driveway. The now mostly dirt road split into a Y shape with a large sign in the fork that had an arrow pointing both ways, with corresponding addresses and family names. I turned onto the fork that I had previously driven a few days ago. I knew the road got pretty sketchy for a rear-wheel drive car at this point. The driveway looked as if it hadn't been maintained in years. It was dirt, and now mud from last night's rain, making it both slippery and steep. I had to give the patrol car some gas to get enough momentum up the driveway without getting stuck. A few seconds of slipping, sliding, and a lot of jostling, I arrived at the house. It was a newer, mobile home, probably early 2000s, with an addition that housed a real fireplace, and the owner had built a detached 2-car garage, as well as a covered walkway to it. The driveway led me to an empty piece of concrete slab, matching the house foundation, where 6 cars could have easily parked. The property was about 5 acres backed up to the BLM land, meaning government-owned land, which translates to, the house had a shit ton of forest behind it. As I pulled up onto the concrete slab, I noticed a weak light in the woods behind the house. Immediately, I clicked on the spotlight and shined it in that direction. I couldn't make anything out through the fog, but I was sure I saw something. I didn't hear an audible alarm, so I rationalized that it may have been a reflector on a tree or my eyes just playing tricks on me. I parked the patrol car and turned on my alley lights to give me a little more insight to my surroundings. I drew my weapon and exited the car, feeling a bit on edge. My heart stopped as I peeked around the corner to see muddy boot prints leading to the garage door that was open. Light from the garage door jamb telling me the door was forced open. A quick glance to the house and I saw large gashes in the siding, as if someone was trying to hack their way in with an axe or something. I pointed my weapon in the direction of the door and backed up to my patrol vehicle. Rain had turned from a light sprinkle to heavy falling globs now. I took cover by my vehicle and radioed my partner.
2-3 from 2-0.
Code 423.
He replied, very scratchily.
I've got an active code 48. The door is kicked in.
I called to him hurriedly.
2-0. You were broken. Repeat your last.
I heard him call back.
Damn it.
I cursed and hopped into the driver's seat to use my car radio.
2-3. Entry has been made into this home.
Copy 2-0. What's your 20?
I relayed the address and my location to my partner, and he acknowledged. I hopped back out of the seat and retreated to my cover position. My ears strained to hear any noise, other than the hum of my engine and the downpour of rain. My eyes felt wild as they darted around the darkness trying to catch any signs of danger within. I shuddered with adrenaline, cold, and fear, feeling completely exposed in the darkness with backup miles away. An explosion ruptured through the white noise, and I dropped to a knee, ducking behind my four-wheeled cover. My meter now reaching maximum, I peeked over the trunk and quickly scanned the area for a threat, seeing nothing. I half-crouched with my weapon raised and sidestepped to my open driver door. I scanned quickly one more time and jumped into the seat. I put my weapon in my left hand, threw the car into drive, and floored it down the muddy driveway. I slid and sideswiped a wooden post lining the driveway, knocking it over, but continued unflinchingly. I floored it past the fork until I reached the thick gravel part of the road, about halfway from the driveway to the cross street. I slammed on the brakes, skidded to a stop, and then began an 8-point turn, slamming into a couple of unsuspecting saplings and denting my rear bumper. I faced my vehicle towards the house and presumed danger. I left the vehicle and drive, my gun in my left hand, and pulled out my phone with the right to call the on-call sergeant. I called, and my sergeant answered after a few rings.
What's up?
A tired voice asked.
I'm at... Entry has been made and possible shots fired. I've not made a visual contact with the suspect. I retreated to a safer location. Officer 23 is en route. Text me the address. I'm on the way.
He answered, and then hung up. I fumbled with one hand to open up the messaging app on my phone, the bright screen blinding me. As I typed out the address, the piercing scream of the home's audible alarm rang out through the night. I sent the text message to my sergeant, then radioed my partner.
23 from 20.
No answer.
2320.
I repeated, slower.
20. I can barely read you. Coming in broken. ETA 7 miles.
Copy 23. Be advised. I have possible shots fired. No visual, and I'm now about 100 yards up the driveway from the turnoff.
20. Confirm. Shots fired?
Affirmative. No visual on suspect.
Copy.
I sat, weapon in hand, foot just above the gas pedal, waiting to plough the nose of my patrol car through the fence of whatever danger showed itself. Paranoia grew for what felt like an eternity, until the flashing amber and white lights of my partner's patrol car appeared in my rearview mirror. I floored the gas pedal and roared the now beaten Crown Vic up the private drive once more, and I turned my amber light bar on.
23. We're going to take the right fork. The driveway is shit. Stay to the left and gun it, or you'll get stuck. Stay on my ass.
Copy.
Our Crown Vics roared up the driveway, and the home came into view again. I pulled my car into a half-turn and park, my partner mimicking. Before I realised it, I was out of the car and marching forward into the ready position, my weapon and light leading. The alarm deafened us as we approached, sharp daggers of pain stabbing into our unprotected ears. My partner on my heels, we approached the scene I had left. I scanned around the corner of the garage again to find a flurry of new boot prints and some of the tools now gone. We pushed forward, taking the right wall of the garage, my partner taking the left wall belonging to the house. His wall stopped short of the garage door, so he took aim at the door while I picked around his wall. I nodded to him, and he quickly scanned around the corner while I covered him. He then fell in behind me as I advanced to the door. He placed his hand on my back, and we burst into the garage, flanking along the walls. But we found it empty. We quickly turned back to the main home, checking doors and windows along the back porch as we went. They were all locked, and through one of the uncovered windows, I could see that the home appeared empty. We circled around the home, finding no signs of entry into it. We rallied back to our patrol cars as the sergeant pulled on the scene in his personal vehicle. I yelled to the sergeant through the still blaring alarm that we still hadn't had any eyes on the suspect. He nodded in acknowledgement and motioned for the three of us to go to the front door. We did this, and while my partner watched the door, the sergeant and I cleared the home and disarmed the alarm. As we thought, no entry had been made. Our ears, now relieved of the sirens, rang instead with the sudden silence. We rallied into the entryway of the home, and I informed the sergeant of our findings thus far. It was a little after 5 o'clock now. The fog had lifted considerably, and the rain had stopped entirely. We walked back to the garage to show the sergeant.
Well, shit,
he said, looking at the garage door.
Looks like he took a pry bar to this. Doesn't look like the deadbolt was engaged.
He photographed the damage with his phone. I turned his attention to the exterior wall of the home and the gashes in it.
Well, that's a first for me. Why didn't he just go through the door?
He inspected the damage closer and said it looked like it had been made with an axe. My partner and I nodded in agreement.
Where did you hear the shots from?
He asked me. I pointed out into the woods behind the house.
I can't be entirely sure, but I think it came from out there. I thought I saw, like, a low-power flashlight out there when I arrived, but I couldn't make it out through the fog, and it disappeared as soon as I noticed it. Well, you want to check it out?
The sergeant asked, pointing to the trail of single pair of boots leading away from the property.
Not really,
I muttered as the three of us marched into the darkness. We flicked our flashlights on and off and moved in a slow and steady scan-advance-scan movement, about 10 feet beside one another, trying to follow the trail while not being an obvious target for the lone gunman in the woods. We lost the trail when it reached soft grass complemented with fallen leaves, and we turned back. The sergeant sent my partner back on patrol while we secured the garage, notifying the property owner and informed the alarm company. It was a bit after 6:30 when we finished photographing everything and speaking with the property owner about every detail of the incident. Dawn was now providing enough light not to require flashlights anymore, and the fog was now very faint. We decided to go investigate the backyard again in the light. What my sergeant found though, simply as it was, made me feel sick to my stomach. The trail, it had split, and the path we missed before led to where I had seen the light. Along that path, we found what appeared to be imprints in the mud of someone laying down, and beside it laid a single 30-06 casing. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys, and be sure to be safe during the Christmas season when the break-ins are high, you filthy animals. I really hope you guys get that fun, otherwise I'm going to sound like a complete jerk. Anyway, thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their story for us all here, and I hope you're all doing well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favour and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent, just so that I can be above board with everything. Please also remember to tell me in the email if you would like to remain anonymous, and please change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. So guys, as we approach the Christmas break, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who has supported the channel this year. It's December now and we're getting really close to the end of the year, and it's just been an amazing 6 months. I'm really excited for the next year too. I really feel like the channel is now in full swing, and I'm looking forward to some more creepy countdowns and scary stories to make all of our nights more enjoyable in 2016. You guys have been so incredibly supportive this year, and I've really appreciated all of the kind words and constructive criticism you guys have been offering. I feel like because of all of you guys, I'm a much more confident and better content creator, and that the content I'm now creating is really top notch. So thank you guys so much for all of your support. Also guys, this Christmas, I want to try and bring out a mega video with all of the best stories of 2015 thanks to all of the positive feedback from the Twitter and Facebook fam. I'll mostly be including the story
Number 4.
Now, I was just in my squad car with my female partner Taylor. We received a domestic disturbance call, and the dispatcher said that there were probably some kids messing around our town's abandoned hospital, and someone called because they saw lights coming from the hospital. So, my partner and I were arriving to the location when we saw some lights in some of the rooms and some shadows in the rooms. We enter the hospital, and we find that there's graffiti everywhere and broken glass all over the ground. When we get inside, we call out to anyone.
Police, please, come out.
We hear no response though, and the place is very unnervingly quiet. We start our search and find that some people must have lived there at some point but vacated a long time ago. We continue our search up to the second floor, and that's where it got weird. We smelt some sort of horrible smell at this point, and we were very on edge about the whole thing. We start our search on the second floor and find broken beer bottles and cans. We're almost done when we hear a kid start to cry, and we call out again.
It's the police, please, come out.
Again, no answer. But now, my partner and I know someone is here. So, we start to search where we thought the cry came from, and we enter some of the rooms and find that they're empty. We enter another room and see that there's someone behind a blue kind of see-through curtain thing. I call out.
I see you. Come out of the curtain.
I move closer and pull back the curtain, and there's no one there. And the shadow behind the curtain, it just dissipated, like there was no one there. I blew it off and said that it must have just been the way the light was hitting the curtain or something. I continue my search, and after sweeping the whole hospital twice, my partner and I head out and on the stairs we can see directly to the end of the hall where the main door is, and I see someone standing in front of the main door. I tell him,
"Police, put your hands up and get on your knees."
The man doesn't seem to care. I can't see what he looks like, all I see is a shadow. I turn on my flashlight and he runs off into the room on the right. I run after him and tell him to stop.
"Stop running! Stop, now!"
He doesn't comply, and I follow him through the room. He runs to the back of the hospital and out a back door into some woods. I chase him for some time in the woods with my partner, and I ended up losing him. I called dispatch, and they sent 3 others. They help us look for about 45 minutes, sweeping the path we went looking for him, and we came up with nothing. We go back to the hospital, and it's not long before we find what the smell is. It's coming from one of the maintenance closets. We find a dead cat with burned out candles all around it. It looked like a satanic ritual or something. It was pretty bad. My partner saw it and she had to head outside. She just couldn't stomach it. The cat, it looked like it was cut open in a surgical fashion, and its blood was everywhere, including in the shape of a pentagram with some sort of non-human skull in the middle. It was a bloody mess, and I hope to never see something like that again. As for the guy, he was never caught, and I never found the crying kid I heard when I was on the 2nd floor. But since that night, I have had some things happen to me in my house. Other than the nightmares that are very vivid, other things that I can't explain have happened. I've heard kids in my house crying. I've heard knocks at night on my walls, and the occasional shadow in my hallway and room at night. Taylor hasn't had anything like this happen, but she has nightmares like mine, and has had one encounter with a shadow figure in her basement steps, but she's never seen anything else. Unfortunately, I have more stories, but this will have to do for now.
Number 3.
So, my partner and I, Beth, we went to investigate a home that a girl had called from but hung up after stating her name and address. It was just the 2 of us, and we were prepared for what sounded like maybe someone had broken into a house and she had to stay quiet or something like that. We arrived in a not so good part of town at a large 2-story greenhouse that looked like it had been built in the 1960s. It had a really creepy atmosphere about it, and it kind of sent chills down my spine. Myself and Beth approached the front door and peered inside, and from where the door was angled, we couldn't see anybody. We knocked on the front door a few times, and an elderly woman came up and unlocked the door. She asked us what we needed, and we told her about the girl who had called from this home. She looked at us all confused and said that no one lived here but herself. We looked at each other and nodded. Just to be safe, we asked to have a chance to look around the house in case she was lying. She just sighed and motioned us inside. We entered the house and looked around. After some time looking, I got a call from the police station, and they reported that the girl had called once again, and this time she said that she was hiding. I shuddered at the message and went back inside and told Beth about the call. We then proceeded to move upstairs, and I was met with a giggling of a girl, I think. I asked her if there was anyone up there, and I was given a reply rather quickly. From my left, there was a closed door, and I heard a girl say,
"I'm in here."
I got serious chills and started wondering if this was some kind of messed up prank, to which I was very displeased with and would have to arrest the woman for. I pushed open the door and there was no one in there. I checked the closet, under the bed, behind a bookshelf, but nothing. I was really freaked out by this, but I decided it had been some kind of prank, and I stormed downstairs, and as I made my way downstairs, I got another notice from the police station. Again, the girl had called in, but this time she told the police that she wasn't there anymore. Now, I just wanted to get out of there. I told the woman what I had experienced upstairs, and she just laughed. I looked at her, confused, and then she proceeded with,
"Oh, I'm sorry. That must have been Emily. She's such a silly thing, always making prank calls. She's such a humorous girl."
Frustrated now, I asked her why she told us that she lived alone then. She smiled wider.
"Well, I do live alone. It's just me in this house."
I looked at Beth, and she just stared at me, bewildered. I thanked the woman and exited the house with Beth. We didn't talk on the way back, and we haven't talked about the job since. It was really weird, and it still gives me chills just thinking about it. I don't know if I was going crazy or if the lady was, and I don't know if it was just some sort of stupid prank they did really well. All I know is that I probably never will know what happened at that house.
Number 2.
A few years back, my partner and I, Deborah, got a call to investigate an abandoned building that someone said they saw a person walking around in through the windows. Since it was seemingly falling apart, it would be wise to make the person exit for safety reasons. Now, I'm not usually scared easily because of past calls where I had to risk my life to catch criminals, but I'll be honest and say that my first glimpse at the building, it gave me chills and made my gut hurt. I just shook the feeling away though, and myself and Deborah proceeded to walk in and start searching the place for the person that was seen. The building was about 4 stories high, so we had to make sure to check every level. While searching the first floor, when Deborah was searching the second, I started to hear footsteps coming up from behind me. At first, I assumed it was Deborah, but then it occurred to me that I hadn't heard her come down the steps, so I turned around expecting to see the person we were looking for, but there was no one. I shined my flashlight around, but there was no one in sight. I got really creeped out, but I ignored it and continued searching. I entered one of the rooms that wasn't that big, and seeing no one there, I turned around to go back out. But as soon as I pointed my lights toward the door, I saw somebody walk by the door. This startled me, and I froze in fear, but ran to see who had walked past the door. Again though, there was no one there. At this point, I was getting scared, and I decided to go upstairs to catch up with Deborah. When I reached the top of the stairs, I caught a glimpse of Deborah shining her light around a room. I ran over to her and told her what happened. She seemed to get mad at me and asked me why I hadn't caught him or her, and right when I was about to answer, we both heard footsteps on the 3rd floor above us. Deborah sighed and carefully walked up the stairs to confront the person. I slowly followed her, and midway on the stairs, after she had turned a corner, a figure stepped in front of the top of the stairs and just stared at me. This made me freeze in fear, and I couldn't bring myself to shine my flashlight on them. He stared at me for what seemed like hours, then giggled, and then walked to where Deborah had went. At that moment, I ran up the stairs and went in the same direction, and after a few minutes of running around, I finally found Deborah. I asked her if she knew someone was following her, and she looked at me, confused. I told her what I saw, and I could tell that this made her nervous. She looked around nervously and made a fake laugh. She said,
Okay, I feel like we're a part of a dumb prank here or something.
I nodded, and we decided to proceed back down to the 1st floor and to try to think of what to do next. We were down in one room for about 20 to 30 minutes before we heard footsteps in the other room. On instinct, I put my hand on my taser just in case this person wanted to hurt us, and the footsteps stopped. After waiting another 10 minutes, nothing happened. Deborah and I ran out the front door. We took a minute to calm ourselves down, and we went to the houses down the street and looked for the person who called us. We found him, and we asked him if he was sure he knew what he saw. He broke down and told us that he and his friend Ethan wanted to play a prank on us and that he had lied about seeing someone up there. When he told us that, I could feel my face go white. I looked over at Deborah, and she looked white too. That night, we had to arrest a boy, and I never went near that building again. I don't know if there was actually someone in there with us, or if I had just witnessed something completely paranormal.
Number 1.
For 5 years, I was the only 911 dispatcher in a region of remote Alaska, which was roughly the size of the state of Oregon. I was employed by the biggest town on the Delta, called a city by its 6,000 residents, but our dispatch office was also responsible for answering any emergency calls in the area once the Alaska State Trooper post in town closed for the night. As unusual as a 911 office is under normal conditions, 911 in Bush, Alaska beats it all. However, the incident I'm about to share was not sparked by one of these calls, but by a strange visitor. The dispatch office in which I worked was directly behind the public lobby at the police station. We had a large bulletproof window in the wall, through which we would communicate with the members of the public who came in for assistance, to pay fines or request reports, etc. This particular night was a deadly slow blizzardy shift, with sideways blowing snow, wind chills down to minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and literally nothing happening. As was usual, I was on shift with 2 officers, and the 3 of us basically dedicated the night to getting caught up on paperwork. By 1 AM, I had finished all the routine tasks that I could think of, and was just settling down to a rousing remainder of the shift completing crossword puzzles, playing Spider Solitaire, and being ready to answer a phone that had not rung for hours. Fortunately, we had a chief of police that only required us to be on station and awake. Once our paperwork was done, we were free to do whatever we needed to do in order to occupy us until the next call came in. We could not leave 911 unattended, and the officers were always willing to sit in while we hurried across the hall to the bathroom or outside for a few moments. I buzzed down to the squad room and asked if someone could come up and cover for me. Sergeant A agreed happily, and I soon heard her footsteps coming up the long connecting hallway. She popped her head in the back door, and I went out the front, opened the door to the lobby, and grabbed my coat and went outside. It was bitter, but invigorating, and I lit a cigarette, prepared to shiver it out. We always left the connecting doors open, so I could run back and take over any incoming calls. The station was built on stilts to keep it off from the permafrost, so the front door was either reached by a flight of 10 metal steps to the right of the door, or a disabled access ramp to the left. There was a landing connecting the ramp and the steps, and the main front door opened off of this. I had gone down the ramp a little way to get out from under the roof and to try and get a better look at the sky. Suddenly, I heard Sergeant A give a little gasp and call my name. I went back up the ramp to the door and called in, not wanting to crush my butt unless I needed to. She came to the lobby door, asking if I'd been standing on the landing just now. I told her no, I was down the ramp. She told me that she had glanced up to the monitor that showed the view from the front door security camera, and that there was someone standing at the door, peering into the lobby. This person was shorter than I, which is unusual since I'm only 5'2". The person was much thinner and wearing a jacket with a hood up over their head. I don't own any coats like this.
It wasn't me, and there's no one out there except me,
I assured her. We both shook our heads. I finished my smoke and we went back into the office. She was showing me where she had been standing when she looked at the monitor and pointed up at it.
There, just like that.
I looked up and, sure enough, there it was. A short, thin figure in a hoodie, staring into the lobby from outside of the front door. Sergeant A ran out of the office, threw open the lobby door and ran across to the front door. On the security camera, I could see the figure until the moment Sergeant A's back intervened. Of course, there was no one on the landing when she opened the outer door. She stepped out, looked all around, bent over to inspect the snow by the door, then came back inside, puzzled. I watched the monitor closely, but nothing appeared at the front door. Sergeant A closed the door to the lobby, returned to the dispatch office, and the 2 of us just stood staring at the monitor for a long time. And nothing.
Did you hear any cars?
I asked.
No,
she said, trailing off as she seemed to catch my meaning.
Hang on.
She bolted down the long hall to the squad room, then out the squad door to her unit. She radioed in as though it was just the beginning of a patrol round, and I responded likewise. She drove up and down the street in front of the station, around the station, on the back streets near the station, through the parking lots for at least 5 blocks in every direction, and never made a flicker on the monitor. No vehicle lights could have caused that figure to appear just there. She finished her patrol and came back to the station. She left her unit parked outside the front door, where it formed a better backdrop for the security camera. Not 5 minutes after she stamped in, the figure, it was back, staring into the lobby yet again. I hollered for her, and both officers came running up the hallway. The other officer ran into dispatch, where he could see the figure for a few seconds before Sergeant A's back obliterated the sight. But again, no one was there, and no footprints in the snow. But 3 of us, 2 cops and a dispatch supervisor had definitely seen this thing. None of us spook easily. I mean, we couldn't do these jobs for very long if we did, but we were spooked that night. Officer C soon went back to his desk, but Sergeant A and I took turns staring at the monitor and opening and closing doors, windows, turning lights and computer screens, anything that might resembly explain what 3 sober adults had clearly seen. But nothing made the figure appear again. Finally exhausting all possible experiments, we shrugged and each went back to our desks. I kept glancing at the monitor, but no hooded figure, not for an hour or so. I took one call from someone who complained they had paid a bootlegger $70 for a bottle of whiskey and never got the bottle. This was a standard call, and it happened 7 or 8 times a month. The town I was in was known as moist, meaning adults could airship in 15 pints of hard liquor a month, but selling liquor in town was against the law. Of course, this worked as well as prohibition ever did, meaning not at all. I patiently explained that buying booze in town was a crime and that police could not help citizens commit a crime. The caller was not willing to press charges. I mean, they never were, and I learned not to bother asking. As I was going through this, I glanced up at the monitor, and I saw the figure again. This time, it was leaning toward the door with hands seemingly cupped to either side of its face, the way you do to reduce the glare in a bright window. I told the caller that I would not be sending a cop and hung up on the furious cursing this answer always triggered, and I hollered for Sergeant A. I heard the footsteps coming up the hallway again, but this time, slowly. I heard them, and then nothing. I moved back to where I could look down the hallway. It was empty. There was nowhere for anyone to go in that hallway, unless they went out of the squad door, and that hadn't happened. Then, Sergeant A appeared at the far end, in the squad room, and called out to me.
Hey C, B said you hollered. It was back, but it's gone again.
She came up the hallway, and I realised that the first footsteps, the ones that stopped, were too light and shuffled too much to be the sergeant's. I told her about those footsteps, and she caught and held my gaze for a long minute. This really unnerved me. Cops looking that way can do that, even when you work right beside them.
Have you heard these before?
There was a note in her voice that made me realise that something serious was happening here.
I have, but always on windy, blowy nights. I just figured that something in this old rotten building was banging around and getting ready to fall off or something. Of course, that wasn't what my trainer had told me.
The sergeant, who had been hired after my trainer left, had not heard the story, so I filled her in.
Apparently, the holding cells in the first police station, the older part, were back where the squad room is now. Once they built the jail, they pulled out the cells and made it into your office, but for a long time, prisoners were held back there. Some of them died back there too. Drunks aspirating their own vomit, internal injuries that went unreported until someone passed out or began bleeding from an orifice or another, and, quite probably, some cowboy cop who went off on some frequent flyer once too many times upside the head. Anyway, there were deaths in the building. Right after the cells were removed, people alone in the front of the building would hear those quiet, shuffling footsteps coming up the hallway, stopping at the water cooler, and when the person looked down the hallway, there was nothing there. My trainer told me that he had heard them some dozen times, always on midnight shifts, always when he was alone up here, and always exactly the same. And you've heard them before?
It wasn't a question.
I have. How many times I told myself it's the pipes or the wind or the bloody permafrost creeping up the floors, I don't know, but I heard it.
She visibly relaxed.
Thank you. Covering for you the other night, I heard them. You were out front and C was on the street and those footsteps came right up to the cooler. I thought I was losing my mind. C's been here longer than either of us. Let's ask him. No. This isn't the kind of thing you ask about. Not another cop, especially one that might feel obligated to write it up on his daily report or something.
I understood this. Many nights I had seen and heard cops going on about the daily report and what would be in it, what would or should be left out, and this was the kind of thing a cop like C would feel obligated to report. He was one of those by-the-book kinds.
But he did see it earlier, when you both came up. He stopped and watched the monitor while you went out. I asked him back in the squad room, and he said he didn't get a good look at anything before I blocked the camera.
We both knew that would be his official position, and that we were wasting our time trying to get confirmation from him. She stayed around dispatch for a while, bringing her paperwork up to work at the spare desk, which had the best view of the security monitor. I busied myself with crossword puzzles, glancing up from time to time. The door locked normal each time I raised my eyes. Suddenly, Sergeant A threw down her papers and snorted,
I can't stand this. Drunks with guns I can handle. Ghosts in the window? I can't handle this.
She had just finished this sentence when the footsteps came up the hallway again. We shot to the office door and watched an empty hallway remain empty.
And that's shit. Fuck this.
She unhooked the pepper canister from her belt, aimed it down the hallway and let loose a burst. I winced and drew back. Pepper spray was a constant around here, as officers frequently tested their cans, came back to the station reeking of blowback spray, or just messed around with it, spraying each other's coffee cups or dinners. The stinging and burning odour drifted into the office, and I waved papers at it as my eyes filled and watered. I stumbled over to the windows and threw them wide open, letting in lots of 45-degree wind and snow. But it cleared the pepper spray, and I stood there a moment, breathing real air. Suddenly, I caught sight of a cop car the sergeant had left out front. There were handprints on the rear window, just where they would have been if an officer had positioned someone there to pat them down. I showed them to Sergeant A, who just stared, and then called for Officer C, who came up. He stared at the handprints for a moment, then turned away from the window with a shrug.
Someone looking to see you if you were in the car?
He muttered.
Someone? Out there? On a night like this?
She asked, frustration and disbelief in her voice. I dug out the spare camera that was kept charging in the dispatch office and handed it to her.
Pics?
I suggested. She nodded and headed out to the car. I saw the flash reflecting from the snowflakes as she shot frame after frame. Officer C watched her the whole time, not saying a word. I turned to him and asked,
When you saw that guy at the door in the monitor, was he wearing gloves? Could he have even left those handprints?
Officer C shook his head.
Didn't see anyone out there.
Then, in an almost inaudible voice, he added,
I never see anyone out there.
He turned and left dispatch. Sergeant A came through with the camera, indicated that she was going to process the pics and went down the hallway. More time passed without incident. Then, Sergeant A brought me the camera and showed me 2 pictures of the handprints. At least they were real enough to show up on the film, unlike everything else that was happening. I was just about to say this when the 911 screen lit up with its usual blaring siren, and I was taking the report of a fire downtown. Normal routine kicked in, normal for emergency services anyway, and I soon had cops on the way, the firefighters out of bed and into their rigs, and answered the other 22 callers that all thought that they were the only one to see the fire. Prints, footsteps and visitors were completely forgotten about, until I got to work the following night and found a note from the chief. He asked me to hang around and see him after my shift ended the following morning. Nothing out of the ordinary, this happened every so often. But when I went into his office, I saw the handprint photos on the desk right away. He asked me directly what I had seen and heard 2 nights before. I told him and added the other occurrences and the stories that B had told me. The chief sighed and leaned back into his chair.
I figured it was that again. Every so often, these things happen around here. Everyone is driven around, trying to make the headlights show on the monitor. People have set tripwires in the hallway. This was the first time anyone pepper sprayed that ghost, though.
His voice trailed off.
Let's hope it's the last then, hey?
I tried a small bit of humour. Bad idea.
It would not be a good idea for the citizens to know that their police station has undocumented residents.
He sharply said. I nodded quickly. Working for the police was uncomfortable enough way out there, where cops were frequently seen as the enemy. I didn't need my boss on my back.
They'll never hear it from me,
I said, and meant it. That is, until I sat down to type this report. That was over 10 years ago, and 4,000 miles away. Late night musings frequently take me back there, and it leaves me wondering just how many times that station has been visited by hooded figures that leave handprints and walk with shuffled feet. G'day mates, it's B-Buster here. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video guys, and police remind me to never join the force. I know, they're getting worse, I'm sorry. Thanks again to the Hive members that bravely shared their stories for us all here, and I hope you guys are all doing really well. For the chance to have your story feature in a video, you can send your story to my email, which is in the description below. And as always, keep them coming guys, as this channel relies upon your stories to continue. Also, please do me a favour and just state in your email what your story is about in the description, and also provide me with a short written statement of consent just so that I can be above board with everything. Also remember to tell me in your email if you would like to remain anonymous, and please change any names if you don't want particular names to be shared. So as promised guys, the creepypasta from the last video was in fact the Deep Web story, which many of you guys actually guessed correctly in the straw poll I put in the comments and in the description. In fact, the poll stated almost 80% of you guys guessed correctly, so well done, and I guess I'm going to have to lift my game a little bit. As always, it would be awesome if you could like, share, comment, and subscribe if you're new. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates throughout the week. You can also catch me on my second gaming channel, all of which have links in the description below. Thanks again for tuning in guys, and I'll see you mates in the next one.
Number 6.
When I was in my early 20s, I worked graveyard at a 24-hour Walmart. I worked in the toy department in the back of the store. I mainly worked alone, and once in a while a friend would help me stock. But unless we were heavy on freight, you basically did your thing and went home at 7 AM. The first time I encountered the man we finally ended up calling Rat Man was around midsummer, 2 years into my job at this store. He would come in around 5 AM and look at all the Hot Wheels cars. He was a collector. There seems to be this group of men in their 50s and 60s who enjoy grabbing up these cars. I normally was in the back tossing my trash and boxes when he would venture in, never really speaking or seeing me, but I would see him come and go. One morning, I happened to be down that aisle when he came for his little 97-cent treasures. He got about 2 inches from my face and introduced himself. I seriously could not tell you what his name was, but he was 5 foot tall, overweight, and in his, I would guess, late 50s. His breath was something that can only be described as rancid rotting garbage mixed with onions or something. He literally had the worst breath, and he would get really close to your face. Our first encounter was just your average creeper feeling you get from someone. Maybe that dude at the bar you don't want hitting on you kind of feeling. I honestly thought nothing of it until he started showing up earlier to try and catch me on the sales floor. He would come up behind me and startle me, try to put his hand on my shoulder or grab a box I was stocking and offer to hold it, in front of his crotch mind you, while I got the items out. I was very young and stupid back then. I didn't know how to handle creeper men, and honestly, I'd only been hit on by a few guys before this that were creepy, to which I would never see them again. I just figured he was a creeper, until one morning he came up to me and asked me out. Oh boy, here it goes. I have to try and blow this guy off and hope he goes away. He came up to me and said, "I noticed that you like to eat at Chinese buffets. You were there yesterday with your friend. I want to take you there. You seem to like the fresh fruit and stir-fry noodles." What the fuck? I never saw this guy at the place, but my friend and I were there for lunch the day before he came in. Was he watching and I just didn't see him? He must have been, and watched what I ate. The place was pretty empty that day as well. My friend and I always went after the lunch groups as she had anxiety and didn't like to eat in really busy places. I just froze and told him no thanks, I'm very busy. I was worried for a bit, but he ended up just leaving me alone for that morning. The next day, I didn't see him in the store, and then I was off for 2 days. That Friday, when I returned to work, sure enough, he was there at 5 AM, looking through the Hot Wheels. I was running behind him and still had boxes to stock. He kept staring at me, so I ended up calling my friend on the intercom phone and asked for her help. She knew what was going on with this guy, so she came over and stocked down the aisle that he was in. I continued working and thought that he had left, so I pushed my cart back to the stockroom, and just as I was about to turn the corner, he came from around the door and grabbed my arm. I twisted back and told him not to touch me, that he scared me. He said he was sorry and was just looking for me. He wanted to know if I'm always off on Wednesday and Thursday, as he came in and I wasn't here. I lied and told him that my days changed often. He then says to me that he didn't think that that was right because every Thursday afternoon I go to H-E-B, a grocery store, with an older woman in a green car. This guy was stalking me. I did go to the store with my mum on Thursday afternoons. I broke away from this guy and the conversation. The next day, he came in again, walked right up to me and asked me out to lunch. I told him no, I was too busy, not wanting to date, and walked off. There had been a few small conversations early on with him and my friend about how he liked young girls to dance close to him. In general, he was creepy and we thought pervert. My friend gave him the nickname Ratman. One morning after work around 10 AM, I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang. This was long before everyone had a cell phone. I was about to cover up and drift off, but I ended up getting out of bed and answering the phone. The voice on the other end of the line shook me to my core. It was Ratman.
Hi Sally, I hope I didn't wake you. I want to know if you go to the movies with me tonight.
I yelled at him. How the hell did you get my number? He ends up telling me that my friend gave it to him and that she said I was secretly interested in him and too shy to tell him. I know that my friend wouldn't do this. I hung up on him and the next night I asked my friend. She was upset and said no, that she would never do that. At the time, my boss was sitting with us at the lunch table. He overheard our conversation and asked what was going on. Eventually, I come to find out that my boss got a phone call in the store at 9 AM yesterday, asking for verification for employment and asked if they had my current number on file. This was long before any security measures were put in place where you can't just call and ask if so-and-so works there. So my boss thought that I had applied for a new job and gave this idiot my number. This Ratman continued to call and harass me. The next day on my 2 days off, he called at least 30 times and left messages for me on my answering machine, even crying and screaming, asking why I didn't love him, and then calling back and leaving a message about our trip that we were going to take together to Mexico and how he couldn't wait to see me in my new swimsuit he bought me. The guy was mental. There were a few times after that where I would be at the store or in a mall and would look over and see him across the food court or in the same store I was shopping in, just watching. I ended up calling the police, which did no good, and changed my number. He finally stopped coming into the store. My boss said that he would escort him out if he did come in, but my boss got a transfer out of state, so this guy would pop in every once in a while. I changed departments and stopped stocking toys. I have long moved away and still keep in touch with the one friend I met at Walmart. Up until 5 years ago, he was still coming into the store, she says. Just older, but still creepy, and had started harassing another young girl who worked there.
Number 5.
This happened to me about 3 years ago. It was the first day of 9th grade and I was heading out my front door. My grandpa owned a very large van that sort of resembled an ice cream truck. The van pretty much completely blocked my view of the left side of our driveway. As I was walking closer to my grandma's car, she was still locking up the house. I could hear very faint humming. I didn't recognize the song then, but now I know it to be A Piece of My Heart by Janis Joplin. I rounded the side of the van to see a woman with horribly unkempt, frizzy, dark brown hair. She was caressing the van in an almost sexual way. At first, I didn't think she had seen me, but before I could turn to get help, she began to speak to me without turning to look at me. It wasn't weird for us to have people offer to buy the van, as it was pretty cool. However, I knew that Janis Joplin was long dead. I'm pretty creeped out at this point, so I turned to look for my grandma, who has gone back into the house for whatever reason. I assumed she had forgotten her cigarettes like she always did. When I look back to face this woman, she has already taken the liberty of getting completely in my face. So close that I could smell her breath, which smelled earthy, like she had eaten soil. This woman looked really unhealthy. This was when I noticed what she was wearing. She had a white nightgown on, like the ones in hospitals, and was covering a dog tag in her hand that was around her neck. Her eyes were so pale blue, I thought it was possible that she might be blind. Being a 14-year-old girl who was scared of everything, I completely lost all sense of reason and tried to book it back into my yard. I felt this woman's cold, clammy hand clenching my wrist so tightly that I winced in pain. "Do you like to rock and roll, little lady?" she whispered into my ear. This was absolutely the final straw for me. I screamed for my grandparents to come outside, and before I knew it, my grandpa come stomping outside, threatening to call the police, saying that he was armed. Unfortunately, this wasn't the last that I saw of Janis Joplin. After finishing school that day, I sat in my living room watching TV and doing homework. I'm home alone for the next couple of hours, and that was pretty normal for me. A few days prior, my household had a yard sale, so our stuff was all tarped up on tables in our backyard. We always put our stuff away this way, especially when we plan on reopening soon. We never had any issues with it. I start hearing the tarp move and then some glass clinking together. I peek out our bathroom window, which overlooks the yard, to see the infamous Janis Joplin lady laying our things out on the grass. I was scared, but I felt safer being inside my house, so I yelled at her to stop or I'm going to call the police. This didn't scare her. She ran up to the window and started screaming curses at me. She resembled a rabid animal. I ran to the kitchen where the phone is, start to dial 911, but the phone rings. I answer it and it's a family friend of ours. He asks if I'm okay and that he called the police because he saw the woman in the yard when he drove by. I thank him and he says he'll circle around and come back so that he can help me talk to the police. It turns out that the woman had broken out of a mental ward that was just a few blocks from my house. The tag she was messing with was her ID. When the police arrested her, she was trying to cut them with one of our plates that she had broken. She kept saying that I assaulted her, and that she was going to cut my private parts up.
Number 4.
Back in 2006, I was a sophomore in high school and was kind of the popular outcast. I had lots of friends, but never really fit in with any cliques in particular. So I tried to surround myself with people who were in similar situations as me. The beginning of that year brought in many new students, but one stood out to me and I knew that we just had to be friends. I won't be using real names here, so let's call him Derek. Derek was tall and quite bulky, but in a somewhat muscular way. He wasn't built per se, but he definitely had some muscle tone. He was one of the bad boy types. Which was kind of out of the ordinary for my rich kid stuck up high school. So naturally, we had to befriend him. He quickly became the bad boy that every girl in the school wanted, and he even grabbed the attention of some of the older girls in the school. One such girl in particular really had her eye on him. We'll call her Ashley. She was a year older than us, and a pretty popular girl. She was kind of the stoner loner type of girl, but one that at the same time had tons of friends, and always had at least one guy by her side. Derek definitely had his eye on her too, but at the same time, she had a boyfriend. Next thing we know, her and Derek had begun dating, and we were all pretty excited for them. Well, everyone aside from Jason, that was. He didn't like Derek to begin with, but when he stole Ashley from him, something in Jason snapped. He was a taller, lanky guy, didn't have much muscle tone to him at all, and was pretty skinny if I remember correctly. Shortly after Derek and Ashley started dating, rumours about both of them began spreading like wildfire. There were rumours of her being raped and pregnant by Derek, and many rumours about Derek's past. All of which we knew to be lies, but the majority of kids in the school didn't think to do the research on it and just blindly believed everything that they were told.